Welcome, class. I hope you're well and strong and staying fit and healthy in this very particular moment. This is the first class that we've had since the murder of George Floyd, and it is the first class that we've had since theatre has been really kind of thrown into massive amounts of turmoil and uncertainty. So it is a very, very particular, specific time. And it's hard to know what to say, and it's hard to know what to do, especially for you guys who are right in the middle of training and learning. And I was trying to think of what I feel and what I can offer to you, because actually that's the most important thing. We are here to make sure that you get the training and the start and the support that you need. And I was thinking of a speech that Martin Luther King made in his right towards the end of his life, actually. I think it was in one of his last sermons, and he was talking to America and trying to really encourage America in that time of massive social upheaval and civil rights and protest. And he finished one of his speeches by saying, "Cowardice asks, is it expedient? Then expediency comes along and asks, is it politic? Vanity asks, is it popular? But conscience asks, is it right?" And that struck me because so many people now, today, young people, people I know, are saying, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And I think it comes down to that. We all know what's right and we all know what's wrong. And so I urge you and encourage you to listen to your instinct and listen to your own feelings and your own experience of your life and act accordingly, whether you're black, whether you're white, it doesn't really matter. Listen to that voice within you, listen to your conscience, listen to your instinct, and act accordingly, whether you write, whether you create, whether you make something up, whether you form a company, whatever it is that you do, listen to your truth, listen to your experience, and express yourself accordingly. This week's guest has spent her entire life doing just that, whether it's on the stage, whether it's in front of the camera, whether it's in politics. She has continuously listened to what her conscience told her and acted accordingly. So it's a massive honor and a real pleasure, and I'm very, very excited for you to meet our guest this week. She's also an Oscar winner. She's a Tony winner. If I were to try and list her credits, it would take up the whole session, so I'm not going to try and do that. But I just want you to help me welcome this week's guest, Glenda Jackson. Welcome, Glenda.
Well, thank you very much. And what you said was just lovely to listen to. I mean, what you were talking about isn't lovely at all, as we all know. Mm. But what you said, and well, of course, you know, he always got it right, didn't he?
Yes.
Martin Luther King. But that is something really very profound, and I found it very moving. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for joining us. I'm as I say, I'm even more excited because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're an artist, you're a person who has continually responded to what you felt was right in your world, in your society, in your country. And it strikes me that that's what we must try and instill in young people now more than ever, because there's such uncertainty. And so I was really keen for you to speak to our students, and I think they'll get a huge amount from you. So I just wanted to start from where you were born, if we can go.
Well, I was actually born in Birkenhead, which is the other side of the River Mersey. So we were always looked down upon by Liverpudlians, you know, for not being Scousers. And then I was moved to my father's part of the Wirral Peninsula, a little tiny place by the sea called Hoylake. I was the eldest of 4 daughters, And I remember accusing my mother, by then I'd grown up, I wouldn't have dared say it to her when I was a child, that she'd given me an overpowering sense of responsibility too soon, because of course, if I went out, my sisters had to come with me. I mean, there was no question. So it was, yes, I mean, the world has changed so much. I mean, the phrase working class background now has so many other ramifications, doesn't it really? But in my day, everybody knew what it meant.
Yeah.
But I was very lucky. I mean, I got a scholarship to RADA at the behest, actually. At the time, I'd left school. I was working in Boots Cash Chemists, and RADA said they would have given me a scholarship if they'd had one, but they didn't. And so the manager of that Boots wrote to my local authority and told them what RADA had said, and my local authority paid my fees for 2 years. That wouldn't happen today, unfortunately, as we all only too well know. But yeah, I was very lucky.
Did you know, when did you know you wanted to act? Like, oh, in fact, the question is, were there actors in your family?
Not as far as I'm aware, no. Well, I think it was, well, this is a mature reflection. I didn't think in those terms at the time, but I felt there was more to life than I was experiencing, and that perhaps I had more to offer than was being demanded of me. And a friend of mine was a member of a local amateur dramatic society, and she said, come along, it's fun. And somebody said to me, I'm sure they always do, you should do this professionally, and that kicked off my approach to RADA.
Well, you've kind of almost touched on it. My question was going to be, how did you then get from going to school in Cheshire to going to RADA? I mean, that must have been a huge step.
It was. I mean, I think my mother thought she'd never ever see me again when she put me on the train for London. But she did, of course. And in a strange kind of way, even though I'd been working in Boots Cash Chemists for 2 years, I think the sense of schools being there for you to learn was really still quite strong with me, even though whatever the exams were in my day, I can't remember now, but they would hardly prove my point. But nonetheless, there was that sense of going to another school to learn something. And really, I mean, the exterior social life of the drama school that I was at, my year, was a mystery to me. I mean, I'd been left for quite a few years before I discovered just what the kind of social interstructures and dramas had been. But it was an extraordinary opportunity for me to be in the centre of London. I mean, I can remember distinctly, you know, RADA is still in Good Street, isn't it? Yeah. Taking the tube from Good Street to Leicester Square. I mean, I didn't realise you could actually walk down. I do now.
You mentioned the sort of slight, or the snobbery perhaps, of being when you were sort of living on one side of the river, in terms of when you came to RADA, did you encounter any snobbery?
I wouldn't say snobbery, because it was a very multifarious community, actually. But there was the ever-present, you were female, so you were less. I mean, and that ran in the theatre as well as, you know, in actually the approaches. I don't think so much from the teaching. It was just that ever-present substrata, you know, that women in the theatre, there was still that. We weren't really up there with the biggies.
Yes. So, because in my head, correct me if I'm wrong, I tend to think of that extraordinary generation that you belong to being the kind of first generation that could come from, and maybe this is kind of romanticized in my head, but that could come from anywhere in the country and become an actor or have a drama training. Or I think of, you know, Albert Finney being able to sort of keep his accent and that sense. So that's really why I'm asking about the snobbery. It feels in my head like at that point in history there was a shift between who could become an actor.
There was a shift, but I think it was still a long way away from people who were beginning to go into the theatre. And certainly if you're a woman, that shit hadn't happened. I mean, this is one of my things. It still hasn't happened. Why do contemporary dramatists find women so boring? I mean, we are never, ever the central driving dramatic engine still. And, you know, the changes that there had been in the perception of women, not just in this country, but around the world, have been very fundamental. And thank God for it. But there is still that big bump in the road.
What was it, what was, when you left drama school?
Yeah.
Was it what you expected? Was starting in the industry what you expected it to be?
Well, it was staggering because I left drama school and I went almost immediately into rep. I got a job in Worthing. I mean, I'd also got an agent. So I had begun that work. And because it was all so new, in a strange kind of way, I had no pre-misconceptions about it. And let's face it, when you're fresh out of drama school and you go into a rep, the other members of the cast don't give you any kind of excuse for not being able to do anything. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I remember the first play I had to do was Separate Tables. I played one of the students and I had to smoke in that. So I was in digs in Kew at the time. So I would travel every day from Kew all the way down to Worthing. I would have, you could still in those days smoke on public transport. So I'd have a practice cigarette on the tube or whatever, the train. And this particular day I got to the theatre, the first scene we were rehearsing was the one in which I smoked. And so I lit up. The next thing I know, I'm lying flat on my back on the stage because I'd passed out because I'd had 2 cigarettes in about 3 hours. The rest of the cast was standing around me going, come on, get her up. What's wrong with her? We've got to do this. You know, brotherhood, sisterhood, forget it. The show must go on.
Well, because I suppose the turnaround of rehearsals must have been so short. It was a lot shorter then. How long did you have to rehearse for the rep?
We had a week to do the show. So I rehearsed for a week, I played for a week, then I rehearsed the next week for another show, and then we did that. So that's how it worked, yeah.
And then you went to the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Well, there were a few years in between before, but yeah.
Oh, were there? Okay. But you went to the Royal Shakespeare Company for 4 or 5 years? I think.
4, I think, yes, 4.
And it was at a point where, and that's, if I'm right, the end of the 60s, the late 60s, is that right? We did
Yes.
Marat.
Yeah, I think it was 64 that I was there.
With the theatre of Cruelty and with the company that you formed with Peter Brook.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that that period, again, is a very sort of defining moment in terms of social upheaval, social questioning. You have the Vietnam War happening, you have the civil rights movement happening, you have all the censorship laws changing. And again, perhaps maybe romanticized in my head, I wanted to ask, how unique was that company that you were forming at that time with Marat, Theatre of Cruelty, the play that you did that was called Us?
US Us.
US Us.
Vietnam War, yeah.
I kind of maybe presuppose that, okay, there was a lot happening, a lot of companies were getting involved with social issues, but then I thought, well, actually, was that actually the case? Or was it something slightly more unique?
It was all down, I think in truth, it was all down to Peter Brook, who was engaged with all that. I mean, he is the greatest director I have ever worked with. I think he's the greatest director in the world. And so he was very much in tune. And one of his basic thrusts was he felt that English theatre, well, perhaps British theatre, I've never spoken to him about on the kind of national level, but was that it was all about words, and he wanted it to be about everything. I don't just mean on an emotional level. He wanted theatre to be able to incorporate in whatever was being done, music and movement and, you know, ideas, not simply a group of people standing just talking to each other. And so that opened up the doors in a way to new young contemporary dramatists who were as engaged with the kind of social changes that you've been talking about as he was, and wanting to see a world that reflected more accurately the realities, the theatre rather, to reflect the world more accurately than it was at that time. And it did cause, I mean, I think, was it Theatre of Cruelty or, no, because we are outside the RSC for that, even though incorporated eventually. But certainly the Marisade and USS, I mean, they had to go in front of, you know, the guy who was in, I think it was the Lord Chamberlain, because there were still those kind of rules of certain things that couldn't be done and said. And so in that way, it was transformative, but he was, as well as wanting to see a better world, he also wanted to see a much, much better theatre. So I was very lucky there again. Working.
And I've read that you were talking about how the author of Marisade, is it Peter Weiss?
Yeah.
Thought that theatre should be a revolutionary force.
Yeah.
And so was that very much the feeling at the time when you were creating those pieces?
I would like to be able to say yes, but as I'm sure you are only too well aware, what it comes down to is what you actually find when you're doing it. I mean, and certainly with someone like Brooke, who expects everyone to work together, if you see what I mean, to discover things together, to have ideas, to throw ideas, to try and use those ideas. So it was really making the play work. The repercussions of it, of course, were enormous, but that was not, I think, at the forefront of our minds.
I suppose what I'm getting at is what do you feel that the artist's responsibility is to respond or reflect the times?
I think, to be honest, actually, that I'm tempted to use the word truthful, but that's a big, big word. It can be, how can I put it? What am I trying to say here? I worked, there was part of when we were doing the Theatre of Cruelty, there was a section of work that we did in which improvisation was a big deal. And it got to a stage where I felt that, you know, the improvisation had become a cliche, really. It had become a way of avoiding really finding what was real, what was truthful, what was right. And I think that can happen in a much broader context as well. You know, there can be ideas by virtue of their purporting to reflect the realities of real life can become cliches. And that worries me quite a bit, actually, because it can be that the harsh realities of life, which is far more general than we're ever taught or in some instances realize, can become sort of bound up in some kind of, we're looking at this and so something's going to happen. No, for something happen, for something to be better, it has to be more than recognized.
Oh, so I should also say for our students who haven't seen, there's the film production of Marisade. You filmed the production, which is amazing. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. You can find it online. Go and see it. It's fantastic. Can you name, so slightly moving, can you name 3 people without whom the actress Glenda Jackson wouldn't be here?
That's really very difficult. I mean, obviously Peter Brook won because, as I said, he's the greatest director I've ever worked with, and he always demanded in a way that was energizing, not depressing. You know, I have worked with directors who their demands are so, I was about to swear, but I won't, but so depressing that it's just, but in a strange kind of way, I think, in truth, my mother and one of my aunts, because, you know, I was born 3 years before the Second World War. I was raised in a small place where everybody knew everybody else, where all the men had gone to be on the firing line. And so we were raised by the women, not only in our family, but in the wider community. And I can hear my mother now say, it's no use crying over spilt milk. There was a whole kind of ethos in which, you were just taught to get on with it.
Mm. And so that's two, okay, three people. Your mother, your aunt, Peter Brooks, your sister, Peter Brooks. You are helping us, you're talking to our students, and I know that helping young people, students, is important to you. I think your grandson's here. Is your grandson here? He's in Gen Next with Mountview, isn't he?
Yeah, he's upstairs probably watching this on his
right, okay, right. But why is it important to you to help young people, young artists?
Well, it's very kind of you to say that I'm keen to help, because over the years, people have come up to me and said, young people have said, I want to be an actor or an actress. And I invariably say to them, if there's anything else in life that interests you other than acting, pursue it, because this is a very, very, very tough profession to want to be in. And it's tough because it is externally seemingly easy in many ways, but it's very, very hard. It's very hard to get a job. It's very hard to be able to, well, you know what it's like as well as anybody. It's extremely tough. But the one thing that I don't think I'm really very succinct about this, but the one thing I would want them to realize, which I'm sure they will when they really start working, is that it isn't glamorous, it isn't a game, it isn't fun, it is a privilege, actually, to be allowed to appear in works by greater creative people than the individual actors will ever be. And to do that to an audience who want to come, which is always, I find, still amazing. But I go back to what I say, it isn't a game, it's hard. And you have to be prepared for that. And you have to be honest with it. You have to accept that it is going to make huge demands. Trying to see the world through a character's eyes, which is what acting is, in a sense, that's very tough. And you have to be honest with yourself and honest with everybody you work with in that sense, I think.
With all that said, when you have been in your career, moving through those periods, moving through those decisions, what was it that kept you going? What was the motive that kept you saying, actually, this is what I need to do, this is what I want to do?
Well, because once you do it, let me put it another way, going to a theatre, doing a show on the stage, and a group of strangers come into the theatre, they sit in the dark, and another group of strangers come onto the stage in the light, and there is an energy that goes from the light to the dark, and if it's going well, that energy is recharged and put back into the light. And so eventually, during the evening of the performance, you have, in a sense, both audience and actors created what I like to think of is a model of an ideal society. Now, it doesn't last any longer than the walk to the bus stop or possibly the station, but nonetheless, that is a unique and real experience. And so I think that's it.
Fantastic. Did you know, when you moved from acting to politics, did you know that you wanted, did you have in mind that you were going to come back, or were you just sort of responding to the moment?
No, it was completely unexpected. I'd been there. I'd been a member of Parliament for 23 years. I didn't stand at the 2015 election. I thought it was time someone else took over. And so it came as a great shock to me when I was asked to do some acting again. And I'm grateful I hadn't been forgotten.
Definitely not. Definitely not. So many people, I remember saying when people would speak, you would say they'd be brilliant if you came back to the stage at some point. So I think a lot of people are very happy.
Very nice of them.
And then coming back to do King Lear must have been.
Well, a friend of mine, a wonderful Spanish actress called Nuria Esper, had done it in Barcelona, and I'd gone over to see her. And she said to me, "Why don't you do it?" And I said, "Don't be ridiculous. They'd never let me play Lear in England. What are you talking about?" Anyway, then the old Vic asked me if I would do a play there, and I put that up to them, and they said, "Okay." And there we were doing it. And
Wow.
gosh, yeah, I mean, what about that, being allowed to do it? Amazing.
Amazing. Did you? So one last question, because you brought it up earlier about gender while we're talking about King Lear. What do you think? I don't know really what my question is. My question is, we're at this moment where everything seems to be up for grabs in terms of conversation about race, gender, sexuality, all of that.
Right. Yeah.
And you've mentioned right back at RADA having the fact this discrepancy between men and women was still so extreme, and the fact that it still isn't where it needs to be. What do you think it is about that kind of white male patriarchy, that thing that runs through our society? How does that change? How do we ever shift that?
We have to keep pushing at it. I mean, to go back to answering one of your previous questions, what I'm afraid of is it will become a kind of token. You know what I mean? Because the unfairness, the illogicality, the bizarre nature of defining people only by externals, all those kinds of things, are ludicrous to my mind. But equally, you have to ask the question, why do, and I do often, creative writers find so many variations in humanity? And yet, look at Shakespeare. What's he write? Somebody said, all these old Shakespeare plays. He's one of the most contemporary dramatists in the world because he only ever writes about human nature. And human nature doesn't change. We can all work for the human condition to be improved. God knows we need to do that. But why that fundamental kind of block in everything, that we're all human beings and our human natures are far more similar than we give them credit for. I hope.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I'm going to open this up to some of our students now, because I can ask you a million questions about.
Well, we must meet again.
About politics.
Oh God, don't get me started.
Okay, well, I will ask one question.
Okay.
I will ask you one question. I went into the House of Commons. The last play that I did, I was playing a politician, so I got taken. It was by a Conservative politician, but he was saying that what the public see in Prime Minister's Question Times is the most sort of dramatic and colourful version of that exchange, and then of course behind the scenes in the corridors of power, you all sort of exchange conversations and ideas. But my question is, having acted for such a long time, having a great career as an actor, how much did that help you when you went into politics? How much did having a training as a performer help you? Well,
I'll kick off by saying the kind of egos I saw going up and down the corridors in Parliament wouldn't be tolerated in a professional theatre.
Wow.
I mean, just not. But because I mean, there was a report in an American newspaper years ago saying that the thing we as human beings fear most after death is public speaking. Well, I didn't have that problem until I stood up in the House of Commons to deliver my maiden speech. And I suddenly thought, you represent a constituency where Keats lived. Do you know what I mean? And suddenly that pressure of English and the English language and English writers were kind of pounding at the back of my head. But I was a disappointment, I think, to most of my fellow colleagues because I had no interest whatever in doing any of those kind of theatrical things. I mean, I think initially it was I was expected either to be so stupid that I'd simply fall flat on my face, or that I would be such a diva that I would be demanding, you know, well, that isn't me, and that wasn't why I was there. So, yeah, it was strange.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so I think we have some questions from our students. And I'm going to start off with Alexandra. Alexandra, are you there? Can you hear us?
I am, hello.
Okay, there you are.
Hi.
Hi.
So my question is, when taking time out of acting to pursue your political career, what did you have to do to keep your creativity flowing and navigate your well-being during this time so that you didn't lose any skills? Was it hard, and did you notice anything different about your acting when you did return?
Well, when I was an MP, I was an MP. I mean, the aspect of acting again was not at the forefront of my mind. When you have, you know, the harsh realities of life in a post-Thatcher Britain, which were real and truly painful and seemingly unchangeable, acting really didn't have any part in that. And so it came as a shock when I was asked to do it after 23 years of pounding those corridors in Parliament. But, you know, you ask, really at the centre of your question, I mean, is something which is very important, because you said, how do you retain whatever skills you have? But, you know, those kinds of things come clearly from practice, being able to practice them, but the real teacher is life.
Brilliant, thank you. So next question, Elena. Elena.
Hi, it's Alana.
Alana, sorry.
No, it's fine, don't worry. My question is, do you have a set preparation process for your roles prior to rehearsals? So, for example, when you played Maud in Elizabeth is Missing, how did you approach playing this character who struggles with dementia? Because as someone with grandparents who has dementia, it was so relatable to watch and, yeah, accurate to their situation.
Well, the film is based on the book of the same name, and that the author is writing about her grandmother. So that was a first-hand experience. But I had, as a member of Parliament, met people who were suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's disease and members of their families. And so I knew, I wouldn't say firsthand, I mean, that makes it sound such a gratuitous thing to say, but, you know, I've been banging on for a considerable period of time that we are, despite COVID-19, a society that is living longer. And we as a people have to decide, and that has become even more marked during this COVID-19, how do we care for our elderly as a society? It's not something that you can just, you know, I mean, it will be expensive, but we have to do it. And that is a problem. But, you know, filming is very, very different to doing a play, because you do really very small scenes. And so there is an immediacy about that was helpful, really, in finding her character, because of course those kinds of realities weren't available to her in many instances, not all the time. But I mean, I remember one scene where I had to remember the name of a driver, because I'd said to someone that I wouldn't go in a car if you were Sterling Moss. Could I remember the name Sterling Moss? I think we did it 6 times. All I had to do was walk away saying I wouldn't get in the car with you if you were Sterling Moss. Could I remember his name? No, I couldn't. It was very salutary.
Well, I was sticking with filming. I'm just going back to the last question. You're talking about the time when you were in politics. Yeah. You were just thinking about politics. But there must have been times where you've won 2 Oscars. There must have been times where you saw yourself on television or Film
No, I
festivals.
didn't, because when I was first elected, in those days, Parliament started sitting at 2:30 in the afternoon, and it would not be unusual to still be there at 3 or 4 o'clock the following morning, particularly if it was the finance bill. And, you know, the constituency element of it, which was the thing that I wanted most to engage with. I mean, you know, the realities of life for my constituents at that time. So it was, although there can be hours waiting for the damn lobby bell to ring to go and vote, even though they don't do it like that now, but the very presence of all those people who you have a responsibility for and towards, yeah, that was completely absorbing.
Mm. Phoebe's up next.
Hello.
Phoebe.
Hello.
You touched on it earlier, but I'd like to know a little bit more what your experience was like working with the RSC and how you think it perhaps has changed over the years, what we as students might expect to find if we ever encounter the company.
Well, I can't answer the second part of your question because since I left, you know, since 92,
Yeah.
I've had no association with the RSC at all. If you're, well, I'm sure it isn't like this now. When I was with the RSC, I would be doing a play in Stratford, and then I would probably be doing another one in London, you know, the Aldwych. I mean, they had those two theatres. But the great game in the green room at Stratford, with in the main actors, a lot older than me, was who could leave the green room last and still hit their cue on stage. What kind of view does that give you of a commitment to Shakespeare and an audience? That was the big game.
I think it's changed now. Theodore James.
Hello.
Come on.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. You've worked with tons of incredible performers and diva-ish personalities over the course of your career in acting and politics, I guess. And I was wondering what was more challenging for you as an actor, working with people like Alan Bates and Oliver Reed, who are famously unpredictable, and people like Eric Morecambe and Ernie Wise, for instance.
Well, the best note I've ever had in my career came from the Morecambe and Wise show, when Eric said to me at the end of the rehearsal of the first show that I did with them, louder and faster. And that was both succinct and to the button. But I mean, it is very unusual. I haven't experienced it, but I know people who have, to work with actors who don't want to act, who want to be something else. I've never experienced that. And I've always found actors remarkable people to work with, because we are essentially, you know, honest. I mean, every time a show finishes, well, certainly my experience, but it isn't solely mine, you know, every time a show finishes, you think you'll never work again. And for a lot of actors, that may sadly be the case, but that is a harsh reality. I go back to what I said earlier. It isn't a game, and everyone who is on that stage or in front of that camera knows that. And that's really, you know, it's a really good cold shower, isn't it, if you start to get a bit above yourself.
Jake.
Hello. Hi. I think you've actually already answered my question. It was about...
well, think of another one.
Yeah, I could think of another one, actually.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, this is another question for you. When you got into politics, it was at the time of Thatcher, which, being a woman in politics, you could either have people loving you because of that reason or disliking you because of that reason. And I was wondering, what was it like starting like, because obviously Labour is very different from Thatcher as a politician.
Don't believe it.
Yeah,
It comes
yeah.
to how they treat women. No, Thatcher had gone. I was elected in 92. But even then, it has changed because there's been a fundamental change in the people who are now elected as members of parliament. But the barracking that went on, if a woman stood up to speak from either side of the house, was, well, it was just what people expected. I mean, just shuddering, really. But then someone said to me before I even went into parliament, I mean, I was fighting the election, and somebody said to me, well, what will it be like for you? I mean, you're going to parliament. I mean, it's just a man's club. And I said to him, and it was true, but that's been my experience all my life. Mm. And we have seen changes because we have more women now as members of parliament, but there is still that fundamental, it's exactly the same in parliament as it is in the theatre, look at the whole world, where, we always have to prove ourselves. Doesn't matter, a woman succeeds and she's the exception that proves the rule. A woman fails, well, that's just part of the course. Sorry to end that on such a cynical note, but it's true.
Jake, did you have another question?
Yeah, my question was, the original question was just about when you came back to acting in the production of King Lear. I was wondering what it was about that production that made you want to come back to acting. But I think you did answer it previously.
Well, it's the play. I mean, it's a privilege to be allowed to do that play. And I'd worked at the Old Vic a couple of times, so it was, it was building on a stage that I knew. And it was a marvelous cast to work with, and it was great.
I've got something to add to that. So, right. As actors, we are sort of motored by ambition a lot, and what we want to achieve and what we want to do, and the expectation of what you want to do. If when you came back to Lear, you didn't have that, you didn't have any expectation of, I want to go and do more acting. Did that make it any easier? The fact that you didn't have, because I'm always thinking, I can't wait to get over the pressure of what's expected, or success or failure. Mm-hmm. Did you have a sense of, well, I'm going to enjoy this, or I'm going to, I don't know what I'm asking.
I think I was helped because I had seen my friend Nuria do it in Barcelona. Yes. And so the remarkable thing for me about that was that it was utterly irrelevant that she was female. I mean, that just didn't come into the context. I mean, she was Lear. And it is such an extraordinary play. There isn't a bad scene anywhere in it. There isn't an unnecessary character in any part of it. And to be allowed to actually do it, I mean, it was just amazing. It was scary, but, God, yeah.
What did you do to get over the scariness of it?
You walk on the stage, don't you? You can't afford to be afraid then.
Brilliant. That's what we want to hear, students. Holly Price. Come on, Holly.
Okay, I think you touched on this briefly, but the second part is a bit different. Are there any skills from your acting training that you have found particularly beneficial into your political career, or are there any that you've taken from politics back into acting?
I'm not impressed by the press. I think that's quite helpful in politics. You have to hide it sometimes, but it's really quite a useful thing to have. Taking back into the theatre, I mean, the most valuable thing in a way was, I spoke earlier about human nature being immutable, and we should all try to work for a change in the human condition. But certainly the work within Parliament, and also the work within my constituency, where the realities of life are up here. I mean, there's no avoiding them. And also, I mean, as Giles said earlier, you know, someone had said that Prime Minister's questions was the kind of theatrical moment in Parliament, and yet, you know, MPs can be friends, even though they're politically a million miles apart. And that again was something, it all reinforced, you know, not only how useless we are as human beings, but also how amazing we are in what we've got in us, if we can only find it and share it.
Thanks, Holly. Keir wanted to ask a question. And is that right?
Yes, it is. Hello. This has just occurred to me, so it might not be terribly articulate.
Okay.
So just going off of what you're saying, I think it's probably fair to say that theatre is broadly left-leaning, but it seems to be quite impotent in enacting change, bringing any sort of change. Maybe I'm jaded. But do you think the theatre has a role in furthering the cause of the left? If so, what? How? Please tell me.
Well, if it does, that's where it'll be stuck. I mean, if you have an overtly, exclusively left-leaning, politically we're talking now, aren't we, theatre, that's where it will stay. Because, you know, the right wing won't go anywhere near it, or if they will be horribly critical about it. And also, it goes back to something I said earlier, which I had difficulty with then, and I have difficulty with now. It's almost, if you can put a label on it, if you can say, oh, this is, you know, left wing, or this is right wing, or this, if you can put a label on what is happening on a theatre stage, then it ceases to be theatrical in a curious kind of way, because you've missed out on the kind of bumps and grinds and massive ability for 1,000 different things to be experienced by a human being, to be felt by a human being. You sort of put them in a drawer and said, that's what that's all about. Well, that isn't what life is all about. That made no sense at all, did it? But I know what I mean.
I think
you don't.
It's the grey area is the interesting bit.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that made sense. I hope that made sense to you, Keir. And I think that's all the questions that we have. But I just wanted to say that, just thank you for your time. You're so sort of honest and sort of pragmatic about things that it's easy to sort of forget that actually I can think of very few people that our students or myself or anyone in our profession could speak to who have such a broad experience in the exploration of what the human condition is in acting, and then in the practical day-to-day, you know, physicality of how people live, how people get an education, how people take care of their health, how people buy a house or not, how people raise their families. So it's been massively insightful and interesting and fascinating to me to be able to talk to you. And I know our students feel the same. It's because I think young people are hungry to change the world and affect the world that they're living in. Yeah. And so to be able to speak to someone who has such an experience of all of that is really, really special. So thank you for that.
Well, I would just add a little rider to that.
Go on.
I'm most grateful to you for what you've just said, but looking at improving the world, you have to live with the reality that time after time after time, it's one step forward and two steps back. Don't stop taking that one step forward.
Brilliant. Glenda Jackson, thank you so much. Thank you
you
so much on behalf of all of our students, everyone at Mountview. Thank you so much for taking time to see us.
Well, thank you all, and I hope I meet you in the flesh someday.